While we're talking about frustrating games, why don't we move on to a game that you guys, the viewers, forced me to play? You guys bought a gold star and selected this game for me to play on the live stream, and we live streamed the whole thing. It took me forever. And it's one of the hardest games I've played in a long time, and I was not prepared for that at all. And it's Resident Evil Code Veronica X on the PlayStation 2. So this game originally came out on the Dreamcast, and I played it for a little bit, but I'd never played the PlayStation 2 version, which has some extra content on it, and a few other changes that I'll get to in a minute. This is probably the most desired game from the Resident Evil community that they want to have remade, and I think it's going to get remade probably here before too long. And I agree with them. I think this game definitely needs to get remade. So you play as Claire Redfield, one of the heroes of Resident Evil 2, and she gets shipped off to a prison in South America, and this whole game takes place over 2 continents and goes through several kind of disjointed areas before she finally emails her brother to come rescue her. It's a very bonkers and weird story that hints like on incest and body dysmorphia and narcissism and a bunch of other strange stuff that feels a little out of place for a Resident Evil game, but it does give it like an interesting flavor that sets it apart from the others, even though it uses similar gameplay mechanics. Now, I say uses similar gameplay mechanics, and it does. There were 3 Resident Evils that came before this in the mainline series, Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, and each one of them sort of took the mechanics of a survival horror game where you have limited ammo and exploring around areas, conserving ammo, and just surviving while you try to solve these puzzles and find keys to progress to new areas. Really, survival horror games are almost like a Metroidvania. But Resident Evil Code Veronica really took that concept and pushed it as far as it would go. The puzzles in this game and the exploring and just the combat is really, really freaking hard. It is hard as hell. This game is so hard. Let me give you an example of how hard this game is and how much they changed it for the Code Veronica X version on the PlayStation 2 over the Dreamcast version. When I was live streaming this, a person jumped into my chat to watch the live stream, and this person coaches people on how to speedrun Code Veronica, but primarily the Dreamcast version. And she was giving me tips on how to get through this game. And she was constantly blown away by how much they changed the X version, the PlayStation 2 version. Enemies don't spawn off screen anymore. So in the original version, you could stand off screen, and if you knew where an enemy was coming up ahead, you could aim to where they were and shoot them off screen. You can't do that in this version. Enemies don't load in until you enter the screen. So you run into the screen and an enemy will, within 1 frame, smack the crap out of you. So it makes getting through the game very difficult. They also increased the health of all the enemies. They nerfed most of the weapons. The primary weapon you use in this game is the crossbow, and it takes about 6 shots to kill a zombie in the Dreamcast version. It takes 40 something to kill them in the PlayStation 2 version. The handgun, which takes like 5 shots to kill an enemy on the Dreamcast version, takes 9 in this version. It's way over the top. It is way harder. It is like the hard mode on the Dreamcast version, but it's the only mode available on the PlayStation 2 version. They just make you play it on hard right from the onset. Now, the presentation of this game is really good. Claire is dressed insanely. She's in a bomber jacket and a crop top, which is, you know, perfect clothing for fighting zombies in freaking Antarctica. The music design is fine. The sound design's good too. It's decent enough. However, after playing Silent Hill 2 not that long ago, this pales in comparison to that. Like, that game's sound design was creepy and atmospheric, and it had like Dolby surround sound. It felt like at times you could hear where the enemies were coming from based on where they were coming out of the speakers. Code Veronica doesn't do that. The Capcom didn't nail that. They didn't get that going, really. But I do know that this was a Dreamcast game. But that's no excuse. There are great games on the Dreamcast, and they had time to sort of gussy up this game for the PlayStation 2 version. They just kind of didn't. They just sort of dumped it out there. Now, I like how this game aspires to something new, but it's really flawed. It is without a doubt the hardest Resident Evil game I've ever played, and I struggled like crazy on this. It's supposed to take, I don't know, 12 hours to beat this game. It took me 30 hours. 30 hours! Now, I was playing on live stream stream and I was talking to people and my focus was directed towards the chat and things like that. But even with them helping me out, I got stuck over and over and over again. But the number one thing that basically knocks this game down several notches in the mainline Resident Evil series is the fact that it asks you to predict the future. And it can soft lock you in a lot of places. And all along the way of me playing this, people were constantly telling me to look out for these sections where you can get freaking soft lock. At one point in the game, after Claire radios Chris to come save her, he shows up and it switches over to playing as him. He has like no items. He has no weapons. He has like a pistol with a couple bullets, but nothing else. You're supposed to, when you play as Claire, put all your items in the storage box so that when Chris shows up, he has access to all the items you collected in the game. The problem is it doesn't tell you that's going to happen. That just happens randomly. Not randomly, but at like an unforeseen point. There's no way you would know that unless that already happened and you got stuck in a situation where you had to restart. And there were no less than 3 people in my chat that told me that they had to restart the freaking game because they didn't know Chris was going to show up. And there are other parts in the game where it switches back and forth between Chris and Claire. They get separated, you switch over and play as Chris, then it switches back to Claire. They share their items between the two of them. You don't know when this is going to happen. So there's like a timer going off and you're playing as Chris and you got to go save Claire, man. The timer's going. Well, you need to detour to go back to a save room and drop your items off, or at least several items. You don't know which ones unless you've already failed, but you need to predict what items Claire's going to need without knowing that you're going to switch over to Claire and drop them in the freaking storage box so when the game switches over to Claire later, she has access to those items. There's one point where everybody's like, take all of Chris's items, put them in the lockbox, go do this thing because it's going to switch to Claire. Everybody's like, you need to leave the Magnum on Chris. Leave the Magnum on Chris because you're going to need it. And other people are like, he doesn't need the Magnum. Claire needs the Magnum. You need to take the Magnum over to Claire or you're going to get stuck. So I leave the Magnum in the freaking lockbox. I switch over to Claire. I finish her section. Then it takes me back to Chris and he's at a freaking boss fight with no healing items and not sufficient ammo to take out the boss. The save point was before Claire's section. So I had to reload like 2 saves back, play Chris's whole freaking section again. And this time, remember that when I put all his items in the freaking storage box, hold on to the stupid freaking Magnum so that after I play Claire's section, he already has the Magnum on his person so I can actually take out the flipping boss. What the crap? This game basically has a series of puzzles all the way through it and it just wants you to have them memorized. So instead of solving the puzzles of the game, it's like you need to know the solutions already so you can optimize the best way to do them. So if they do decide to remake this freaking game, they need to solve a lot of that. They need to give you some clues and some heads up and give you some more items so you actually have a chance to make it through this freaking game without help. Because if I did not have chat helping me, I would have had to play through this game like 4 times. I would have not been prepared for these big switchovers, and I think that is not fair. And I think that's the reason that this game hasn't received a remake, because Capcom knows people got really frustrated with it and they gave up on it, and they're not as likely to come back and play it again like they are the first 3 Resident Evil, or the first 4 Resident Evil games, 1, 2, 3, 4, which have all received remakes because they're beloved. This game is not as beloved as those for obvious reasons. Now, I'm not saying that Resident Evil Code Veronica X is a bad game. It's a good game. It's just massively flawed. It has the backbone of a fantastic game. It just needs to be molded into the masterpiece it could be. So, how did Resident Evil Code Veronica do? It's just a 7. If it wasn't for all that finicky soft locking crap, it would be more like a 9. I think there's a lot of really good stuff there.